Then I'd like to welcome Ben. Ben, your first job will be to get your presentation. And I'd like to quickly introduce Ben. He is a person who has a decade or so of experience in the energy industry, based in the UK. Where he's an environmental policy advisor. He has a passion for renewable energy and energy efficiency. And he's going to be talking to us about eShrimp. I recall this as something that was introduced some years ago here at IIA, if I remember correctly. Not Pueblo, of course, and this is 4 years on, so it'd be quite nice to get some update on what really happened in reality over the last 4 years. So, Ben, thank you very much. The floor is yours. I'll just try and dim these lights, and there's somebody else who can do that.
Good. Well, thanks. So, Tajia's last slide there, lessons learned promoting good governance. What I hope is going to come across in this presentation is a willingness amongst a significant number of oil and gas companies to try and achieve good governance. So, as Peter said, I'm going to talk to you about eShrimp, and I'll introduce what that means, because I expect many of you haven't heard of it before. Got about 20 slides to get through, basically how it started, how it works, and then we've done some user feedback in the last few months. What we plan to do now, and then help that we need. So firstly, OGP is the International Association of Oil and Gas Producers. They're based in London, but they have an association of about 70 member companies, mainly independent operators, but still several national oil companies, some service providers. Within that, there are task force. I'm a member of the ESHA task force, which is the Environmental Social Health Impact Assessment Task Force. And I have been, well, I was quite active in 2005. Okay, I'll talk a bit closer. I was quite active in 2005 when we developed this process, and now I've been asked to come back and review its effectiveness and see what can be done to take it forward. You'll see the companies involved, they're relatively large companies. The aim, I won't read through it, but basically to be consistent. You can see it's been developed by a committee. But to be consistent and to share best practice. The challenges, which were back then in 2005 when we started this process, and I'd say they're still very, very prevalent today. The projects, generally more sensitive locations, more complex management as well. The inconsistency that you often get amongst projects. Unclear, or the decision making is often not recorded particularly well. So what we wanted to develop is something that could record decision making. And of course, information overload in this age. A lot of practitioners on the ground just saying we've got too much information to deal with. Therefore, we have to develop a process. As always, start early, integrate it into design and decision making, middle management commitments. Contractor management is seen as really essential. The continuous process, so it's not static, it's not something which is just a snapshot of the project at a particular time, but it's continually evolving. The information, so much information available to people, how can that be presented concisely? And then finally, just be responsive. It is a process, so be responsive as understandings of the risks change. Therefore, ESIA, if you like, we repackaged it because many practitioners and many people in companies didn't understand it as a process. I think most people here probably would see it as a process, but the term does get confused often with just a particular regulatory requirement to tick in the box, essentially. So eShrimp, environmental, social health, risk and impact management process. But that's what's developed, and I'll just talk through a little bit of how it works. Basically, it's this plan, do, check, learn management cycle. 3 main things up front at each phase of the project. Stakeholder participation is required there, the risks, opportunities and assessments, the management plan, and then generally at that point, the phases of the project, you have the decision that's made, and then you have the implementation and follow-up. When I talk about phases, interestingly earlier, we were talking about different project phases. We've tried to define it in different ways. Within my company, it's appraise, select, define, execute, operate. we just used a lot of the different member companies came in with how they define project development and different project phases, and we came up with some generic terms. But at each stage, it creates a matrix, and the next slide will show you what eShrink looks like. It's supposed to be quite a big poster. I don't expect any of you to read this, but this is the kind of like the front page, if you like, call it the deliverables matrix. In the coloured boxes, it's got that process at each different phase you go through, and it's an active PDF file, so you can click on any of the actions within here, set deliverables, and then behind that, I'll show you an example of the task sheets later. That top bit there is just to define, in fact, a bit just like earlier, you know, what do we mean by a project? So we've got upstream activities, we've got major upgrades, we've got decommissioning, and we just wanted to put more clarity behind that, so that you follow this process based on the project that you're working on. Like I said, if you enter into that matrix, you end up with all these different task sheets. And the task sheets give you the deliverables, which are particularly important for the project manager, and then generally the practitioner on the project would then go through an expectation of what is required, key tasks and checklists, and it's a record of what's been done. So that was launched in 2007 officially, although it was mostly completed in 2005. And then in March this year, I did, with help of a couple of others, a survey of how effective has it been in trying to achieve that aim. So 49 people we spoke to, 40 different companies. It's quite difficult, we found it quite difficult to penetrate beyond the obvious ones that were obviously members of OGP, so 70 companies there. Because one of our aims, one of our ambitions for eShrink was that the smaller operators that aren't members of OGP, or perhaps even are, but can't afford to employ people like me to be doing internal policy type work, would adopt this and use this as the process as to how they manage the environmental and social risks on a project. 72% of the people we spoke to had heard of it, which was positive. But being used extensively, there weren't many doing that. As in, I suppose, how I had imagined it being used, where people actually physically tick off to show what they've done. Instead, what happened is they used it as a benchmark. When they were redoing their internal policy, they would use eShrink as the benchmark for that. And the reason they didn't use it extensively instead was simply because it wasn't functional. And I'll talk about how we hope to take it forward. I've got some kind of other anecdotal stuff. So there was, quite a few people that said that in their projects, often the mitigations for the risks that they see don't feel appropriate, kind of hesitant about that. I've got a picture to show that. So often, you kind of think you're kind of prepared for a risk, but you can still be pretty nervous about that. I need to remember the order. I've got a few more pictures. Quite a few felt as though it was a lot of unnecessary work was done. It was duplicated, and it was work for the sake of work. A bit like this side. Others were talking about the detail. They get lost in the detail, and they don't see the bigger picture. There doesn't seem to be anybody on the project that has clarity on the bigger picture. And so as they're munching away, they kind of lose sight of the bigger risks, such as this poor. And then this one here, the difference between policy and reality, what they see, what management's telling them, contradictions and having to deal with that. And then finally, I just saw this picture a couple of weeks ago, what they see day in, day out, and then what is being said about the project. I think probably lots of you will recognise this. You have to read through it to kind of see it. Now, I'm going to get more specific on 3 points, which I thought probably this audience would find interesting, in particular around the survey.